Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm doing fine. The light is flashing, and I'm ready to be renewed.
Well, I'm glad yours is flashing. Mine's gone out. I think I'm sort of past my sell-by date, according to my life clock.
I'm older than you.
Yeah. I just feel it. I think sort of I'm expecting Michael York to turn up at my house soon and sort me out. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be talking about 1976's Logan's Run, originally based on a novel of the same name, and I do want to talk about some of the comparisons, but basically starring Michael York, Jenny Agutter, and eventually Peter Ustinov. The story is set in a distant future, post-catastrophe. It's sort of wars and famine and all kinds of things, and in a world that is now run by automatons and robots, a world that is automated, people get to live in pleasure and leisure for a certain amount of time because they are all given a palm crystal, which is their life clock, and when they reach the age of 30, they have to enter carousel, which gives them the opportunity to renew, which I don't quite understand, and I have questions about that. And if they don't choose to go into carousel, then they become a runner, and if they run, they will be chased down by a Sandman, which is basically sort of like a police force for runners.
I thought it was like a gothic guy on Netflix.
Yeah, that's what he is. He's just, yeah, that's the crossover I want.
He just like appears behind a door and just blows sand on the face of the runner.
Time is just an illusion, and that's what the end. However, the main character, Logan 5, is tasked with a mission from the main control unit to find sanctuary for those that run and escape. And so he tries to infiltrate sanctuary and track them down, but in doing so, finds that there is more to the world than the domed cities that they live in. That's a fair assessment of the plot. So, first off then, Julian, what are your thoughts on Logan's Run?
Well, I mean, this is the strangest X-Men movie I've ever seen, but I suppose it's okay as part of the new multiverse that they're doing over there at Disney.
I don't know how it fits in with the sequel, Logan.
Well, yeah, I thought that too, but I mean, this must just be an alternate universe, with a very different casting for Wolverine, and I think that's
Jenny Agutter playing Wolverine was a real bold choice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not having him pop claws once, I mean, like forget Logan, and the Wolverine. This is some art house stuff right here. It's like they've turned Wolverine to a proper science fiction character, and so I really enjoyed that. I mean, this is a bizarre movie. It is. I remember it as kind of being. Obviously, I'm joking for those of you who haven't seen it. It's not a Wolverine movie. But I remember it as being sort of lackluster, it in a way it's more lackluster than I remember, and it's better than I remember. It has strengths. I think the odyssey of Logan's Run, and him going out into the world. It's got a lot more of that. That's a lot more both superficial and interesting than I remember. And at the same time, that city, which I think is all anyone remembers from this film. They remember Carousel, and they remember, the Sandman, and, I mean, that city, outside of its sort of depiction of sexual politics, is utterly incomprehensible and kind of even more lackluster than I remember.
Yeah, it's interesting because the from a special effects standpoint, like the model work on this is great. There was some absolutely fantastic modeling work on this, and it's just dome cities, and then you sort of see the buildings and sort of look, monorails and all this stuff. It looks very futuristic. But yeah, the actual structure of the city is, and how society sort of works is very odd. But we'll get into that sort of thing because I actually really enjoy this film. This is I haven't watched it for quite some time. I was, we put it on the list, and but you're right. There's a whole sort of the majority section. Like it's a 2-hour film. I mean, this film is sort of 1 hour 58 sort of thing. You can pretty much split it into two. There is the stuff in the city, and then there's the journey that they go on, this odyssey of sort of looking for sanctuary. And I really enjoy all that. I actually I do sort of like this there are sections in this film like I really enjoy, and I like some of the character arcs as well. Like Jenny Agutera's Jessica 6. Like her conviction that sanctuary exists, and it's just sort of in its Logan, it's going like, no, I think we've gone past it. Like when they meet Box, and we'll talk about Box, the robot, and you see all these people frozen. It's sort of like, oh no, like this there is no sanctuary. So like or there may have been at one point, but it's gone pear shaped. I find all that really interesting. This sort of like that's the thing she was holding on to. The reason she was able to sort of continue to exist in that sort of this thing, this world, is because she sort of knew that there was this sanctuary that she could sort of go to after. But again, this goes back to this idea of one of the things I want to talk on is this idea of youth culture.
Yes.
That this film really does sort of poke at.
And predict in a lot of ways. I mean, this is still 76 when you could be considered sexy over 50. Well, at least if you were a man.
Yeah. Yes, they would partner you with as a 50-year-old man with like a 24-year-old woman, and then be like, they're a romantic partnership in a film.
Sure. Yeah, that never happens today.
Yeah. Well, maybe not on screen, but Leonardo DiCaprio has his age limits, as we know.
Yeah.
But one of the things we should highlight that quite quickly is obviously this was based on a novel, and for the film they did make a couple of changes. And the first one being, which is very important, they moved the age limit from 21 in the novel to 30 for the film. And that makes a whole lot more sense because 21 is too young for this to make any real sense. And the other one is they introduced carousel rather than in the novel. They just get put to sleep, and there's sort of like I haven't read the whole book. I've read sections of it just while I was researching. So they made some sensible choices, I think, sort of to give you carousel as a sort of a visualization of this ritual that when everyone reaches 30.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so let's talk about the society, right, and these choices. And you're right about those changes. Also, there's a Mars colony in the book, which makes a big difference. But yeah, I mean, so right, the society that they've created here, we're in some sort of post-apocalyptic world. We're 23rd century, I think, and instead of Star Trek, we have a post-apocalyptic universe in which an AI runs the city, right? But it's not a fun, interesting AI like Alphaville. It's, some AI that has apparently decided to fix overpopulation by killing everybody in the movie at 30, right? And I think what's interesting about this is the idea of sexual liberation. When Jessica puts it, apparently you can put yourself on the circuit, which basically makes you materialize.
It's basically sort of like a materialization version of Tinder. You can literally swipe left on people.
Are they teleporting? It seems like
that's what it seems to be. Yeah, they teleport into he has a guy teleporting at one point, and he's just like, not tonight, and then moves on to the next. Yeah, one. Swipe left.
And then he says, "Oh, are you into women?" Because she's not into him, and she, and he says it as if it's not a big deal, and so it seems as if, sex has been dissociated from procreation, so homosexuality is just accepted, et cetera, et cetera. So that's interesting. This sort of like youth culture that's more sexually free, I think, is interesting to me. But a couple flip sides to that. First of all, it might be sexually free, but if you have a culture that is divorced from sexual reproduction, it's interesting that it still preserves gender roles. And, all the Sandmen, the cops are all male. And when Jessica shows up on the circuit, which I guess is Tinder, but you're expected to have sex. I mean, okay, obviously you can say no, it's not like prostitution, but it does have certain overtones of that. She's in a dress that's completely split up the side. Like, I mean, she's very, very revealing. I mean, and later on, a lizard goes up it when they're outside. I mean, obviously that's not part of their society, but the men are not dressed in the same revealing way.
No, well, it's interesting because some of the costuming is all the women are wearing very sort of like skimpy, revealing, those sorts of dresses, like very short and there's things. However, I would say, I mean, when the male turns up on the circuit, he's shirtless, wearing brightly coloured trousers, and he's wearing a headpiece and something. So I'd take it that's almost like that's the purpose of that. Like she says that she was feeling sad, so she put herself on the circuit to sort of cheer herself up. So she was looking for connection in some way because her friend had gone to carousel. And so, I expect that's what she's done. Like, she's almost like dressed herself up in those clothes, which is always the costuming thing, but that's sort of the point. But when later on you do see there are men sort of wearing like, tops that are the V-neck goes down to the waistline, very 70s. Like, I'm surprised there's no medallions, but there's lots of that. So you're right, the women definitely wear more revealing clothing, but the men are wearing incredibly tight trousers. Some of the red sort of costuming is, you can tell which way they're leaning. Let's put it that way. And so I do find that is interesting. But you're also right about all the Sandmen are men. So that is there are no female, there are no women Sandmen or Sand people. I don't know, but that feels more like a thing from the 70s than a I don't know. But you're right.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it can't fully escape, the time in which it was written, and shot. But I also, the other thing is I don't understand how the society really works. Like you say, so the idea is at 30, everybody goes to carousel and they, spin around and then they're lifted into the air by anti-gravity, except you can see the threads. But, okay, I don't know how they're lifted into the air. And then they just kind of like explode. There are these explosions, but they're clearly think that some of them could have survived that. But it's not really clear if that is clearly killing somebody to them, if they understand that as a death or...
One of the things I'm unclear of, and this is where my question came from, they talk about maybe they've renewed, but no one seems to be able to define what it is to be renewed. Now, the only thing I can think of is it's like an afterlife, or is it reincarnation? Like I don't quite get what renewed is. Right. And they talk about it, and even at one point, like Logan 6 actually says to his Francis, whatever it is, his Sandman partner, he says, Do you know anyone that's been renewed? Oh, I've heard of it. But well, no, but anyone we know? Do you know anyone that we've known to be renewed? But they never tell you what renewed is. So I'm not even entirely sure they know. It's just sort of accepted.
Yeah, and it's very strange because if it does mean reincarnation, which the first time that I saw this, I thought, oh, that's what it means, because you began with a baby and you're told, oh, it's going to grow up to be a Sandman, and there's a Sandman who is being, in carousel. And so you sort of have this echo of reincarnation, But if it were reincarnation, it'd be very easy for the AI to just say, "Oh yeah, we've chosen these people; they're reincarnated now, or they soon will be born," or just say, "Oh, their souls are coming," or whatever. Um, that would be very easy to lie to somebody about, much as religions today lie about what happens after death. Why would you need this to be exposed? How could you then say, well, do you know anyone who's been renewed? It seems as if that can't be what it means, but it's not clear. I mean, is it that you get 30 more years and but if you, but well, here's the other thing. So we know that it's not a society that reproduces sexually, but so presumably they could, grow 30, grow new the same number of children, or they are growing, so they could just say, oh, they're resurrected, right?
And I think
Or
that's
reincarnated.
because they do say that, don't they, about the resurrection or reincarnation, but they do say one dies, one's born. Like that's the
Hmm.
purpose. Like, and they sort of say about, because there's actually a really interesting conversation when they talk about sort of like harvesting. So like an egg and some sperm is taken and a new baby is created. And it is almost like and that's the reason they have numbers. There's sort of
Hmm.
like a generational thing
Hmm.
of she is Jessica 6 and he's Logan 5. Now their ages don't seem to quite. I don't know how that works. From should there not be
No.
is it every 30 years that one's born, or do they have to be at a certain point, or every year? I don't know. I don't really
Yeah.
sort of know. But
Yeah, and then what's going on with those? Like, okay, yeah. So you're right. Shouldn't it also be like Jessica 600 and something, or I don't know. But also, what's going on with those cubs? Like, presumably you start as a baby, right? And then presumably they're aging at the same rate that we do, right?
yeah, they get 30
Uh,
years. Yeah,
yeah, so okay, but then there's these cubs, and there are a couple lines that just make me unclear. How is this? How is the growth process? Who's raising them?
Well, the AI, I mean, they actually say at one point they're taken off to be raised by. So they're taken away from the parents or the whatever, and then they're taken away to be taught and to be educated and to be raised. And so they sort of go into like the AI raises them, using like the. I sort of again in my head I have it as a sort of like robotic nursemaids and stuff. Like they clearly didn't have the budget for
Hmm.
that, but like you could definitely have that kind of thing. But that was my assumption. Like there's a whole um like they aren't allowed.
Nursery area that we haven't seen
Yeah,
with,
exactly.
like,
Like
the Jetsons, Rosie.
yeah, exactly like Rosie. Yeah, um, and they're released into society at a certain age. Like they have like a growth period, and then they're like, oh, you can go off and now become, you are old enough to exist within society for the next 15 years or whatever. Like
Hmm.
that sort of seems to be that is in my head. However, I pictured it. I didn't question it. It just sort of popped in my head and I was like, oh, that's how it works. Because there's no sort of one of the things I find interesting is excuse me, is that thing of like everybody that you see. I mean, it's difficult to tell because the extras cast is large. They've got an awful lot of people in this film. It's quite well populated, which is kind of cool. But they're all clearly in their 20s. I would say, and they've sort of populated from that. But there aren't any. There's no children. There's no teens. Really, you don't really see anything. And again, I think that's because of the clothing they're wearing. They're a bit like, no, we really need people to be over a certain age to be sort of on screen wearing this clothing, which is again fine, but like it does feel like one of the things I find that's interesting is, and again maybe it comes from complacency. Like no one questions this.
Hmm.
Like everyone's incredibly sort of like as always in this society, everybody's incredibly sort of slim and fit and this world of leisure.
Hmm.
There's no gluttony. There's no sort of like,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
then there's no existentialism either. No one's going like, it's no one's really going. What is the point of this? Like, what we just live for pleasure and leisure. Like, there's no artistic. There didn't, when we
Hmm.
talk about like Star Trek as a or whatever, like you said, there's a utopian future. there's often this sort of depiction of, so we can explore art, and we can explore science, and we can explore these things. Like, we know that we are no longer tied to having to work, but there doesn't seem to be any of that in this world. It's just sort of wandering around and doing like things. We don't even see any sports or anything really. Again, I think they're restricted by budget. But, like, I don't know what their days are made up of. To sort of
That's a good point, and I would love to see more of that. I would love to see like it's not a religious society. It's clear,
Nope.
It's clear to me that it's not a faith-based society. On the other hand, it'd be nice to see a philosopher preaching, like you said, an existentialist message. And this brings up the whole idea of rebellion. And I do think that Logan does a good job of reacting to say, like, what, like, where are you getting these ideas? And that's amusing, and I think it works for what it is. But it also seems to me, at least at this point in my life, to be remarkably childish. And that is to say that, like when I was a kid and when I was this age, in my 20s, it seemed as if society was incredibly conformist. And I think there are ways in which society is incredibly conformist. And coming out of the 60s, I mean, this is still 76, it has some of that hippie sort of anti-conformism. But the flip side of that is that we also live in a society in which people question everything, including all the stuff that they don't need to question, right? Like, was the election stolen, and why do I really need to, drink water? I could drink my own urine, I mean, it's this weird way in which you can present society as conformist or as blindly, questioning and dumb the other way. But I don't know. It does a decent job at what it does. It just doesn't seem like you were saying, people would question, and there would be some role for that.
Well, and this is where I'm sort of curious about. Yeah, and this is again, limited by budget and time. Like, if it chooses to focus on specific things, like, but yeah, I mean, even the people that sort of direct them to Sanctuary, I mean, you find that there are other things going on. Like, there are people like that, the doctor that does the face change and other things where, and there are clearly jobs. I mean, that's the thing. Like, there are people that work and have skills, and so I wouldn't mind. And why is there a doctor when an AI could clearly do that work? But like you say, there should be someone who has like a valid. Like, there needs to be a debate at some point in this film where someone proposes the opposing view. I mean, this is we always say this when we talk about these future positions. You've got to show the good and the bad. So what is it exactly that they're rebelling against? Oh, we want to live beyond 30 because we know that renewal is a lie. So we want more life. Cool. What do you want to do with that? Like, what is it that you're proposing? Not just I want to live beyond 30, like I want so many more years. Okay, how does that work? Why are we in this position? Like, the AI took some calculation that said this is the work. I'm now controlling the level of population by one dies, one is born. Like, we've got this window of life. Cool. Okay. Let's have give me some sort of philosophical debate as to why that's good or why that's bad. Like, what is it that I'm sort of looking for that tells me why Logan rebels? I mean, when he goes off and they find Peter Ustinov and it's sort of like this slightly mad old man, I don't see how that's a selling point. Do you know what I mean? It's not going, oh, look, this like, even when they go outside, this thing of like, I see parts of it, like when they're in Jessica 6, like you said, like when they're outside, they escape, and we'll go into this detail. But like she says, like, I hate it outside. I hate it.
That's a good scene.
It is, and I understand that because it's like they've never known nature in that way before. But then she comes around, and you see her communing with with the cats, and you sort of see her exploring and understanding things, and so coming back and going, actually, there's more to this world. Like, there's more of an argument regardless of the age thing, there's more argument to be like, go outside the city. Like, there's more stuff out there. Like, there's a wider world. And that seems to be a stronger argument than the age thing. They don't seem to lay out an age thing and go, like, getting old's good. And you go, is it? Like, beyond a certain point, like, do you know what I mean? Though, like, and again, I don't think they're there to sort of go.
Scott Weatherly endorses mandatory euthanasia at age 30. You
Not at 30, maybe.
No, of course not.
I'm already done. But I do see, and we do talk about overpopulation. I'm not advocating for this. I'm not saying it's the answer, but there is a point when you sort of reach a certain age, and people are just like, yeah, I'm sort of done. I'm I've got illness, I've got I can't walk, I've got dementia, whatever. Like, it feels like 32, but like, I don't know, it doesn't give me a good philosophical debate to say here's an alternative. Like, natural progression and birth and everything is clearly the answer, because you're going, well, no, that's what led to the disasters in the first place. So what is it what is the alternative?
Yeah, I think that you make an excellent point. I mean, I'm joking, but I would say this brings up a different question for me. I mean, I think the point that you're making that is truly excellent is, what is the evil of the society that we're supposed to be seeing that makes it a dystopia? Because it is utopian in certain ways, but clearly we're supposed to be on the side of the rebels, right? And it's a dystopia because it kills people at age 30. Right, except it also keeps people from the outside world, and that whole secondary level is a whole additional layer that might be more effective than the first. But this thing about killing people at age 30, I mean, and of course, look, you're right. Anybody in their right mind is in favor of euthanasia and a right to end your life, nobly and of your own free will, especially after a certain age. It is sickening that we have more respect for our animals than we do for, our own selves and loved ones. Having said that, 30 seems so remarkably young. And maybe it's that, the two of us are more than a decade past that. But it does seem to me like, I mean, even from a very basic AI determined perspective, you would, even if you run the numbers and you say, like, okay, it doesn't make sense to keep people alive past 60 or past 50 or what, even if it's a relatively low number, I mean, it would be more than 30. By the time you're 30, I mean, and again, we don't need to rewrite the movie, but I mean, you might have an AI say, oh, well, we should have tests every decade. And if you don't, pass these tests and prove you're a good citizen in whatever way, although then again, how the hell are you a good citizen? What is the, as you say, outside of the Sandman, it doesn't seem that there's much function to the society. Everything is taken care of by the robots. I mean, you could be a doctor, but most people don't seem to have notable occupations. So, what is the AI's criteria? I mean, it's not clear at all, except, this is just something the AI started doing. And so it doesn't seem like it's very well thought out, in addition to, us just having basic questions about, and it's funny, the last movie we talked about this season in episode 7 was THX 1138, and we pointed out that it doesn't give us enough information about that society. And I think the same is true here, to a lesser degree, but it also doesn't have some of the charms of THX, in just its artsy charms.
That's true. I would say I still enjoyed this film more, actually.
I agree. I think it's a better movie overall.
Yeah. But you're right about the society and things. It's one of those you're not supposed to question. Because it's based around that sort of, again, one of the things I find interesting about these sort of, when they show these kinds of futures, there's always in many cases almost like a ritual element to them. They, yes, we say it's not a religious society, but there's almost like there's always like sort of like a spiritual or ritual element. Like even going to THX, there was the talking to the Jesus booth, and there was the sort of the priests and all that kind of stuff. And in this, you have this idea of carousel.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Great point.
It makes me think about other, watching this one in particular made me think about the Shirley Jackson short story, The Lottery. Where someone is chosen, and it's sort of like there has to be sort of every year there's a sacrifice, and they choose it by picking the stones. And again, I'm like, okay, this is where I think as a we can't get away from this idea of ritual, of ceremony. Like we always introduce this, and it's sort of like it just seems so part of human nature. And even if this AI introduced it, like it fully understands that there's almost like an aspiration. Like we need something to give us purpose. So this idea of renewal, because they keep saying in several occasions, there's a line that gets repeated, is doing everything you can to give you the advantage to achieve renewal. Now, but they don't seem to know what that means. Like even they don't know what that means. But the point is that I don't think they're supposed to. It's supposed to be vague enough. It's like a cult, isn't it? Like it's vague enough that it's sort of like it gives you something to distract you and to give you sort of,
I mean, you say that, but what do we know about heaven?
Well, no, exactly. I agree.
I mean,
totally, yeah.
Well, you're going to be united with Jesus and with dead people, right? How is that going to feel? How is that going to look like? Well, don't worry about it. It's all going to be great. Everyone gets a mansion. How are those mansions laid out? How many rooms? How many floors? Don't worry about it. It's a mansion. I mean,
don't ask a question. Yeah, it's
very vague.
Yeah, but exactly that's the point, isn't it? Like again, this comes to almost like it's not it's not loaded with religious iconography, but there's still a ceremony there. Like when you see the people being led into carousel, like the people that go into, like they go around the big crystal, they're wearing the masks and the robes and all that kind of stuff. Like it's all got ceremonial elements to it. Like it's not
special uniforms. I mean, they with a sort of fire and everything. Yeah.
Exactly, and the audience is there, and the audience is celebrating. Like it's an aspirational thing. And it's obviously
it's a religious service.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're right.
There's almost. I mean, at one point when you see it, because Logan 6 and his partner sort of do go to one. Logan 6 is on his feet, and he's sort of going, renew. Like it's almost like like it is like he's cheering them on. Not knowing they're actually being vaporized, but so it is. There's almost like it becomes that religious thing. Like we can't escape this thing. Like death needs to have a purpose in many cases, and I think that's the point. Why religion? We can't get past this idea of the great barrier. Like what's beyond it? Like we don't know. This is the point. Like we don't know what renewal is. And maybe we don't need to know what renewal is, because they've just got this concept, and maybe they've all got different ideas. I mean, it'd be quite interesting if like there was a conversation between Logan and Jessica, and they were like, "Well, I think this is what renewal is." "Oh, well, I think this is what renewal is." Like they don't actually know. They just know that there's this thing, renewal, and that's good enough. That's what they're aiming for. Like the reason they stay fit, the reason they stay they do these things is because they see it as advantageous to becoming. But it's all been made up by the AI. The AI is just going like, no, I just want them to be healthy and fit because that's the best way for them to live. So the way to do it is to manipulate them. I mean, again, you could even get into that, like this society. It could be a complete sort of, stab at religious control by saying like, oh, I've completely made this up but as an AI, this is what I calculated as being the best way to control the population.
Well, it reminds me of the Brothers Karamazov, where there's that quote about like, cheerfully they will die. Cheerfully they will die, and they will do so happily because they believe in an afterlife, and you will let them. Yeah, I mean, and I would love that conversation. Again, you're describing kind of a very different film, but a film that has those discussions. What do you think renewal is? That has a philosophical core, or at least a more fleshed out version of this society. And I think it's not that the ideas here are bad. I mean, the ideas here are superficial, but they're interesting. And they are more fleshed out than, what we saw in THX, where it seemed like things are just thrown in. But at the same time, I think you're right that these ideas would suggest those conversations. And yet the film doesn't seem interested in really giving us those conversations.
No, it never. I don't think it considers them, does it? It gets to a point, and it's sort of like, oh, we don't really need to go there, but we are going to talk about other things. I mean, there are other things, like it shows, and one of the things I do like about this film is it does sort of try to show, don't tell. Like there are certain things I think it shows about society, as you said, about the circuit and about sort of like that sexual liberation. But there is definitely a darker side, like especially to the Sandmen. Like there is a runner. And Logan and his partner sort of tracking
early
him.
on. They chase him, and
it's a sport,
and they're sadistic. I mean, they're like run,
like really, and it's sort of like it's a game to them, and it's said at several occasions, like especially of Logan's part, like he doesn't want to miss out on a good run. Like that's the point. Like their job and their purpose is to track down runners, and they take pleasure in it, and there's no qualms about shooting this guy. He sort of like they corner him and they shoot him, and they're like, oh, that was a good one. Oh, that was fantastic. What a good exercise. Like there's no as far as they're concerned, like there's no morality in this. They've done their job. Like there's no sort of like questioning. Like, oh, we've just taken a human life. It's just like, well, no, he would have been. He wasn't good enough to go to carousel. He attempted to run. That's our job. It's very sort of clinical in that, but they've almost made a game out of it for their own entertainment, which again comes from this leisure society. Like everything has become a form of leisure.
Yeah, both times that I've watched this, in full and thinking about it as an adult, I have liked that sadism, and I've liked that they go there with it. On the other hand, now that we're talking about it, I'm sort of feeling exactly the opposite. That it seems to me that what that's doing is manipulating us to think, oh yeah, this is a dystopia. These people what they're doing is terrible, right? And what they're doing is extinguishing a human life, which is exactly what's going on in Carousel, right? So we're being told in a very ham-fisted way, like, this is an evil society, and these people enforcing these rules are sadistic. And it seems brave that the main character is depicted that way, but in fact, he is the classic dystopian character who has an arc and learns otherwise. But it seems to me that here again, just as you were saying, like, why doesn't anyone question the society? Why doesn't anyone say, it's not nice what you're doing, right? I mean, even in Blade Runner, where, they're killing replicants who are supposed to be soulless automatons, I mean, even if they're not technically robots, there's clearly a moral, some people are fine with it, but it's clearly, like watching a human being die is something that you have a reaction to. And it does seem as if, but then that gets you into questions like, well, does anyone die of accident? I mean, they have these railings. Somebody must fall. Somebody must, drown in one of these nice pools or something. And so, clearly, why wouldn't they have some moral reaction to killing somebody?
I think what it comes down to is two things. Because you say about accidents, there must be deaths related to accidental things. Like you say, fall over a rail, or just something simple or stupid, like someone's choked to death on a bloody olive or something. Like I don't know, like there must be something. However, they have highlighted, and this is one of the interesting things I want to come back round to. But there's we meet a Sandman who's been injured. He's got a bloody head and his arms all torn up and stuff. And they're like, oh, I'm off to be fixed. And he's got no qualms about it. Like, it's not like he's going to be sort of like, oh, I'll be back in the game in a couple of weeks. I've just got to go and heal up. It's like, oh, no, I'm going to get fixed now. So they've got like advanced medicine and technology. Like, they're going to change his face. Like he says, they joke about having, oh, well, whilst you're at it, you might as well go change your face sort of thing. Like, it's this sort of level of surgery is nothing. Like, it's a regular daily occurrence. And so they're fine with that. So again, and I want to come back to that because, well, if you've got this level of medicine and healing, why 30? Like, why not beyond that?
Good point.
So there is that. But the other thing as well is like they are Sandmen, and they're raised from birth to be Sandmen. And so I've got no problem with him being sadistic and stuff, because that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's what they're trained to do. That's what they've always been told to. This is how they've been taught. This is how they've been. This is the society. This is the community that they've grown up in. So as far as they're concerned, there is no problem with this. Like, someone I think should challenge him, maybe from the outside, maybe one of the people in Sanctuary or something, or one of the people that's looking for Sanctuary. But I do get that, like, if this has been around for however many years, this structure, it's sort of just accepted. Like, okay, well, yeah, he's a runner. He was either going to go to Carousel, but if he didn't, again, he's. It's not just the fact that he's chosen to run; it's the fact almost like he's disrespected the ceremony. Like, he has chosen not to do Carousel, which is the chosen. That's you being literally being elevated up. In this moment of renewal or whatever, and he has disrespected that. So there's no sort of qualms or no morality because he's gone against the conventions of that society. So I completely understand that from a Sandman point of view, where they don't address. Think of, like, if you think about Judge Dredd or judges, like, that's what they're trained to do. There's no qualms about enforcing certain laws. That's just what they do, and I can sort of see that as being part of it. Now, it should possibly be questioned later, like maybe he should be given the option to do it later and doesn't, or at least questions it, or whatever. But it's not that film. But I kind of like that sadism. I still like it, the fact it's there, because it's playful and it's sort of like, it shows how immature they are in some ways as well. But they're not there to question the existentialists. They're not there to question the philosophy. It's just a game. Everything's just leisure. Everything's a game, which makes it sort of even more sadistic.
Yeah, I like the points that you're making. I mean, I find them kind of convincing. I do wonder how they don't know that he's running, because they see him earlier, right? And the secondary character says, "Oh yeah, he's going to run. I know just by looking at him, right?" But when you see who has reported for Carousel, how do you not know who is running? Right? I mean, de facto, the people whose birthday is, that day 30 years ago, have not reported for, Carousel. How do you not know then? Right? Why don't you just go track those people down?
Yeah, like you say, it shouldn't be that difficult. But I think from a story point of view, from a standpoint, they're trying to show sort of their efficiency, or that sort of, like, especially for that character. I need to check his name. Actually, I am going to double check it. I think it's Francis, but
yeah.
It's because what they're trying to do is his tenacity, like how much he takes it seriously, because it's he's the one that then chases Logan down when it comes to when he goes off on the run. It's I'm trying to find the bloody character. There you go. Yeah, so when he's the
Francis
one,
VII.
Francis VII. Thank you. So yeah, when Francis sort of he's the one. So I think they wanted to show you that he is that sort of, like, the he's more committed in many ways than Logan 6 or Logan 5. Sorry. And so I think that's sort of what those scenes are there for. But, like, you're right. I don't know how it works. Like, he's like, they've got like a GPS as well that can track them, and can track the crystal in your hand. So, so there are certain things I kind of like that. But it's there for a purpose in the story rather than to show sort of how the society works, I think, which is one of the. But you could clean it up, most definitely clean up that whole thing.
Well, go ahead.
No, because the other thing I like, actually, is talking about cleanup. I like the fact that when they've killed him, like, they just walk off, and there are more people. Like, again, I think now we'd probably do it as robots, but these hover things come in and they just spray something over the body and it just dissolves and disintegrates. Like there's no burial or sort of like disposal or anything. It's just eradicated.
Yeah.
It's very efficient, and I kind of like that as well, that there's no sort of second thoughts given to it as well.
Yeah, the special effects are a little dated, but I mean, I do like the idea, and that does sort of suggest the kind of society that they live in. I do also like while we're talking about sexual liberation, I love once they're running the nightclub scene. That's like, that is pretty much as risque as you're going to get in any mainstream Hollywood movie.
Yeah,
76.
Because that's a really good point, actually. Are you talking about the running later on when it's all in slow-mo and stuff?
Yeah.
Because that's like a pleasure dome, isn't it? Where things are put into slow motion so that you can experience pleasure for a longer period of time. Great idea. I mean, it's a fantastic. I don't know how it works, but I kind of like it as a concept. But I was confused. So when I rented this off Amazon Prime to watch, and I've just checking it on I'm just checking it on IMDb now. So this is an A. It says for the States. So the American rating is an A. So I don't know what that is. Yeah.
I have no idea. Adult? Okay. I mean, is that
maybe?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. No, because this is a PG over here.
No, I mean, what do you mean over here? I mean,
in the UK, this had 7+ on the rating, and was down as like a PG. And so I'm watching this, and I'm like, I don't know how they got away with some of this stuff. Like, there's some bits in it. I was just like, oh wow, this okay. Like, there's I think this would be rated higher now for the amount of sort of sexual innuendo and stuff that's in it, than 76. They were clearly way more liberated. It's bizarre.
Interesting. So the film did receive a PG here, but it was cut extensively because there was lots of nudity, and so they cut it extensively. I mean, it is interesting that I think you're right that, if anything, we've become sort of, despite
more prudish.
It's sort of more anti-sex and anti-nudity.
Yeah, I mean, there's a scene that you do get to see Jenny Agutter's boobs in one scene, and I was genuinely like, oh, this is 7+. Like, I was a bit like, oh, okay, wow, and you see her bottom, and I was just like, and you see Michael York's bottom, and I was just like, right, okay, this English prudishness came. Oh my, I'm a little bit of a dizzy after that. Oh my gosh, but I was like, oh yeah, I'd forgotten about this, that this film actually is kind of risque in those respects, and so I was a bit surprised. But and as you say, the sort of the suggestion of that nightclub scene again, I was just like, oh wow, okay, there's some interesting thoughts in this.
Yeah, it looks like they're having orgies.
They most definitely are. Yeah, that's it. It's just sort of.
I mean, it's not quite Eyes Wide Shut, but it's pretty clear what's going on.
Yeah, and so I was a little bit. I was surprised at the rating compared to what you were shown. So yes, I do see that, but again, I think it's an oddly sort of like, again, it's good. It's shown sex positive, society, which I think is cool and is kind of progressive. The 70s were surprisingly progressive. I think I keep going back to these films, and you're like, like you say, oh, something happened between then and now that I know exactly what it is. It's the
really what do you think it was?
I'm going to say it's the 80s, and it was the new Christian right and Thatcher.
Yeah, it was Thatcher and Reagan. I mean, I mean, basically, your country has been a fascist country in some form or other ever since. Fascist light. We're the new David Cameron fascist light.
We're not fully committed to it yet, but Liz Truss is moving us closer.
Tony Blair, can explain to you why fascism is really the liberal choice. And the same thing, Reagan, Reagan and the religious right, I mean, he was a totalitarian theocrat, and really pulled us dramatically, much in the same way that like the Trump stuff realigned the Republican Party yet again to like the Reagan stuff was already to a point of insanity, I mean, the Republican Party was the pro-abortion party, until Reagan came along. But yeah, so you're entirely right, and I do think that it is nice to remember that about the 70s. That the 70s is remembered for the oil shocks and terrorism on planes and inflation and all of these things, and for drop dead to New York, Nixon saying crime out of control and all of these kinds of things and Dirty Harry. But it was also a time of and obviously Stonewall happened, and it wasn't like there was real sexual liberation for everybody, but there did
but it was
seem to be
there.
a kind
It was
of promise.
Yeah, it was there. It was in the zeitgeist as sort of like as a promise. I think you're right. I mean, don't forget that one of the biggest films of the decade was Deep Throat. Like there was a there was a little pornography film was a success. So
And
yeah.
people respectable people took their dates. I mean, that's to me, that's the epitome. I mean, I don't think it's a very good film, but that's the epitome of where I want the culture to be. You could take your date to see, a Marvel movie, and take your date of whatever gender to see Deep Throat the next night. To me, that sounds like,
or even in a double feature. That's what you want. But yeah, I think that's the sexual politics of this film are quite sort of interesting in that way. That again, there is a sort of the only thing I would say, going back to touch on some of we'll move forward. But there's when she is on the circuit, and obviously Logan sort of materializes her, and she sort of comes onto the thing. He does sort of takes no. He does take no for an answer. He accepts that,
true.
Which is
very
fine.
good point.
But it does take a little bit of time at first. He's like, no, come on, and it's sort of like But I think I do think that comes from, rather than him being, let's say, sexually aggressive, I think it does almost come from an expectation of sort of like, oh, and if you're on the circuit, like that's the point. This is sort of like I honestly think that is because he's there going like, I want to, because when she leaves, like his Francis comes in with two of the women. And they're straight at it, and so I honestly think that's the point of the circuit. The circuit is literally there for you to sort of like to have a sexual partner, so it becomes like an expectation,
just like Tinder.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's an expectation that comes with it. So that's all it is: hookups and stuff.
Yeah, well, so not for me. Let me tell you.
But
I agree with you. But it's also that he's, like you pointed out, a really good point, which is that he's arrogant, and later on. I think it's Francis who says, like, you could have any woman, why?
Well, even Jessica says it. They both say it. There's a line. They both say to him, like, you could have any woman in the city. Like, she says, like, why me? And Francis says something as well, like, we can do what we want, pretty much. Like, Sandmen have a sort of a status above the others.
Yeah, so I still think, so you're right. And I think it depicts his arrogance more than it does. I had the same reaction of like, well, he's a little persistent here. But for 76, for a guy who's got power, who's, got privilege to say like, look, you came here dressed like this on the circuit to have sex, but you're saying no now? Look, okay, he takes that pretty well. There are a lot of guys in bars who could learn from that today.
Well, and there's a great line, because she says no, and he basically says, are you sure? And she says yes, like I'm saying no, and he says all right, he backs down, and then later on in the film, like you realize that like they've been together, and they are forming a relationship, they are getting closer and stuff, falling in love, however you want to sort of depict it. But there's a scene where they're they are swimming together, and she says the answer now would be yes.
Yeah.
And so he has respected that, like, he has sort of waited. So again, and she's giving the consent, and so the level of sort of like consent,
affirmative consent too.
Yeah. Again, I was like, wow, all right, like 76. Like, we should be looking at 1976, like for how sort of consent works. It's it was really interesting to me at that point.
Yeah, that is true. Like, this is a very woke movie, post Me Too movie in that respect.
Yeah.
Before we go on to the sort of like flight stuff, can I ask you a couple questions about the city and that stuff? The first is, why does the computer tell him, if it even does, that there is no afterlife or whatever this renewal means? So there's a scene where Logan's talking to the city computer, and it's a cool scene, and I love the revelation that, first of all, over 1,000 runners have actually escaped, right? We've not publicized this fact. And that's why we believe there is this, the sanctuary that there's this cult of people with an ankh who speak of, Okay, this is all very cool. And then there's the devastating news that, oh yeah, by the way, nobody's ever been renewed.
Yeah.
But it's very strange how it comes about. It's not really clear that that is what the computer's saying. Logan just kind of out of nowhere says, oh, so this 1,000 people have escaped. Have none? Are you sure that they haven't been renewed? And the computer sort of says, no, they haven't been renewed. None of them have been renewed. And Logan says, like, nobody's ever been renewed. He jumps to this universal conclusion, and the computer doesn't deny it. And that's when. So it's very strange to me how it comes about.
Well, it's interesting because I think one of the things I like about cause we'll talk about the AI, especially the AI's collapse at the end of the film, which I struggle with a little, but
just a little.
Yeah, we'll get more to that. But it's very binary. Like, we find that the computer sort of it's very binary. It doesn't have nuance, and so it has intelligence. It's artificial intelligence. It has intelligence, but it has like a binariness to it. So it's almost like one of the things I took from that scene is like he's questioning it, and it's sort of like, well, I can't lie, but I can lie by omission. So if I refuse to answer your question, if I don't answer your question, I'm not confirming your position on renewal. Because he does jump to a conclusion, but the computer doesn't go, no, there's plenty of people that have been renewed. Shush, move on. That's not the position it can take, because it would have to respond with, no, you're right, no one has been renewed, because it's a lie. Right. So the AI chooses not to respond, almost to leave it vague for him. Like, it can't deny it, so it decides not to confirm it either, which I find kind of sinister, that the computer can make those decisions. Because it says later on, it says this answer does not program. Like, it can't get past certain things. The computer itself has made a sort of a conclusion, jumped to a conclusion. It's deduced from, I suppose, logic that there is this thing, sanctuary, because these runners have gone away and stuff. And we sort of find out where a lot of them, I assume, are. But one of the things I find interesting is I don't know how the idea of sanctuary seems to have seeped out into society. Like, we see that Jessica 6 has got an ankh. She wears it. We see, and I like the idea. I like the idea because this comes a little bit like the idea of the fish, that was used in sort of early Christian times. Sort of Christians would use that symbol of the fish to sort of depict, that they were sort of, to other people, whatever, in the know. So I take it as that sort of thing, which is kind of cool. But I don't know how this rumor started. Like, how did this thing grow in society that you've then got like a bit of an underground movement that's looking for sanctuary?
Yeah. I like it, although, who are, the question is, presumably we think there must be a sanctuary, there must be some resistance movement. We find out that's not really true. There doesn't seem to be a sanctuary as they go along. There are these ice caves, and, Box the robot, has frozen several people who have escaped. But then there are these voices talking to him, and saying, put your hands on your head, and saying it's not much further. Who are those people? Have they not gone further?
No, I don't think they have. Because
they must not have, right?
No, the people that live in the city, this is the only thing I'm going to take. Because he says, like, the last instruction you'll get is about, they give him a key, don't they? And they say, this is the last door. And that's what takes them to sort of like to Box, because they then go into all the sort of the pipe works and the water works and all that kind of stuff. I honestly don't think. I think they've said, like, they're beyond this point. Like, we have not ventured beyond this point, but that's the way to sanctuary. So there seems to have been, like, something has gone on. There was a story there, like, because it feels a little bit like the Underground Railroad. This is this idea of sort of like getting people out, but it doesn't have a destination. It's just sort of like, oh, we get you to this door, and then beyond that, like this is out of the city, and it's up to you to sort of find sanctuary.
So how would that idea perpetuate, right?
I don't know. Who comes back and says, oh, this is sanctuary, this is what it is? Don't know.
Yeah, I've seen it. Trust me.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, yeah, that doesn't make sense to me.
No. And, I almost, I had a thought whilst I was towards the end of this film, which, again, I know I rewrite these things, but I almost wanted the sort of like the AI had sort of like created this idea of sanctuary in order to send people out into the world as a test. So it was like, look, we can't send anything out into the world. Like, I don't know what the state of the world is, but I can still track the palm thing, or it believes it can. And so I was like, oh, if I can send people out into the world, I can determine what state the world is. Is it still like a nuclear wasteland or whatever? And so, it was orchestrating this thing, which seems very overly complicated.
It's interesting, and it gets into the kind of like Matrix asks, like, oh, this was just another control kind of thing. Although, here's a question that just occurred to me: you don't see the Palm devices switch off until they're in the outside, right? Yeah. And they're in the water in the wild. That means that they were presumably still on in the ice cave.
I believe so. Yeah. So you don't see it otherwise.
Doesn't the AI know, like, oh, they've all died in the ice cave and been frozen?
Yeah. I don't know, because that's the thing. Like, they don't know, but they've been walking for quite some time and before they notice as well. So
true.
I don't know if it's just they just haven't noticed.
It's quite possible. And it is true that the friend Francis doesn't seem to notice until
it's
the climax.
Right? Yeah. And maybe you wouldn't, because it's always there in your hand. It's just there, so you don't sort of think about it. Like you don't sort of consider it. Maybe it's not something It's part of our understanding because it's part of their life clock, but it's not. It's not a big part of those.
I feel like, how like if you have a mark on your hand that's just like dirty because you touched something dirty, I think you usually notice it within a space of a few hours, Yeah. I mean, and especially going through odd terrain and stuff, you're going to look at your hand, because you're constantly, I don't know.
Especially if you're outside, you're touching. If you're touching things like trees and rocks and things. Yeah, quite possibly. I don't know. Yeah, it's a reveal, isn't it, for them to sort of like, because that's their freedom moment. So I understand why, but no, you're right. I want to just quickly get to this point because they do escape. So I don't understand how sanctuary works. I don't understand how the rumor or the story of it has spread. I don't understand
or how the society works.
No, particularly because I don't understand
who the Cubs are.
The Cubs are like, you've got these kids running around, and there's a great sort of confrontation there that, like, again, but it doesn't seem to be rooted in anything because they seem to know about the Cubs. Like the Sandman seems to know that these Cubs exist because they're in the cathedral. They're in cathedral. And he challenges him and says, like, well, next year when you reach sort of 16, they're going to tear you to pieces. Mm-hmm. And I'm going, like, why? Why is their society based around an age thing? Like, that makes no sense. Like, why would they?
Because they're not going to be kids anymore. But aren't they free of,
the crystals and stuff? Yeah.
I don't understand.
I understand. Like, I like this idea of there's been like these wild things, outside of the sort of realm of the city. There's sort of like on the peripheral, this where society starts to collapse, or there's other things a little bit like things don't quite work, or there's rebellious groups. I like all that. I really like the idea, but then he just seems to impinge like some social order on it. Like, well, this is what's going to happen, and the guy's like, no, that doesn't seem to work.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a moment where I want it to be Mad Max, Yes. I want it to be wild and crazy, and it kind of gets there, and it's sort of theatrical, but it's just a little stagey. But then they have that moment where it's like, wait a minute, have I missed who these kids are and how the society has evolved, and why do they have this rule? And I have entirely... that I have that moment entirely too much during this film, where I just think, did I miss this? How does that make sense? And of course, I didn't miss anything. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's just not there. And the same with Box. Like within, they go through the water. There's an awful lot of water in this film. I'd forgotten how much water is in this film. But they go through, and then they eventually meet Box in his ice cave. Like he literally lives in a freezer. And I kind of I like this idea because I don't believe Box is the only one. So this city has obviously got some sort of mechanism that food sources from the sea. Like he talks about things coming from the sea, plankton and fish and all kinds of things. And he freezes it and then delivers it to the city. That's where I take it. Like this, that he is almost like he is a part of the robotic mechanism that allows for food to come into the city. Like that's again, like you don't get all this information, but that's what I'm taking it as. Like he's a part of the mechanism. So Box isn't the only one. There's clearly more of these that are sort of doing different jobs around the city to sort of like, and because the population doesn't know, and he's like a broken one. He's like a defective one. For whatever, because he says, "Oh, the food sort of stopped, but my purpose is to freeze things, and so I continue to freeze people as they sort of come through."
So you think that the Box is still bringing food to the city, and he's not the only one?
Don't think. No, I think he has stopped doing it because I don't think the food is coming to him anymore. There's like an input of like food. This food source would arrive, like raw materials or whatever would arrive to him. He would then freeze it, and then that would be passed on to the city. But he says like it stopped coming, but then people started turning up, and so I froze them. Like I was just doing my job. Like he's clearly broken, but like he's still serving a purpose. But I think there are other box kind of robots around the city serving similar purposes that are still working.
Yeah, you assume he's not the only robot that had this assignment, right?
Yeah,
the whole city isn't being fed by Box.
No. And so I find that interesting that sort of like this one again, because this goes back to the AI knowing where they are. Like the AI must have some sort of control and of these robots, these sort of mechanisms that are feeding things into the city. Because the city's not broken; they're still being fed, and it's still heating and lighting and everything's going on. So these other box units must still be working.
And there's no reason to think that the crystals have really turned off at this point either. So this does fit your sort of just another control kind of. I mean, there's got to be something to that, right? Logically.
Oh yeah, like because the whole point of Logan being sent on this mission is to find Sanctuary. That's the point. And so yeah, there must be some sort of measure of control or measure of sort of like monitoring going on up until a point. Because because when it does lose control and when it does lose, that's when when he gets taken back. That's when the computer's like, you need to tell me, like and we'll get to that shortly, but. Yeah, but again, like the box scene is almost it's hindered by special effects.
Yes,
when the ice thing falls apart.
Oh God, yeah.
I'm assuming
the ice cave collapses.
Yeah, the superimposed ice falling is not good. It all happens. This is the thing is, the thing with this film is because it is a saga. The second half of this film is a sort of an odyssey, as you say. But things seem to happen way too quickly. And this is where I think this was followed up by a TV show. I've never seen the TV show, but I could totally see this being like an 8-episode TV show. Like break it down because the whole thing with Box is literally over in like 10 minutes or even less than that, and you're just like, hang on, what? Like this Sandman and Jessica got past pretty quick, yet all these hundreds of people have stopped and were frozen. Yeah. Like
I always hate that in movies where we're the successful ones. But here it's worse because the entire cave collapses, Yeah. Right. Well, I do want to point out that you made the point that it doesn't seem as if 1,000 people have been stopped just by Box. I mean, this is 3 years after Soylent Green. So it's possible that the food that Box and his compatriots are bringing back to the city might be made of escaped people.
Oh, quite possibly. That'd be a fantastic idea, wouldn't it? If he is like, well, the fish and seaweed and kelp or whatever, like stopped coming, but this other food source started turning up. So we've been processing that, and yeah, I would love that actually. If actually you were to find that they were to find out that Sanctuary is actually you basically become a fish finger you become meat stored in a freezer, but then it's sent back into the city. That would be an amazing reveal. That would be like that's where you go back. All right, like Logan's, I'm going back. Like, we've got to stop this. Like, this is because that's what you could even say. Like, the AI knows Box is broken. Like, there's a but however, there's still a food source. But then you'd be like, well, why is it looking for sanctuary if it knows that this is happening? So
and you could even have the Planet of the Apes reveal of it's the sanctuary fish truck, sanctuary fish services, that's the sanctuary we were headed to.
Yeah. They tried to have a similar reveal to that later on, but yes, I'd like that actually. If Box sort of like was made by the Sanctuary Robot Corps, like or something like that. But they get past Box quite quickly, and and they move on. And again, being outside, they're in the. And this is again one of those things of sort of like it's supposed to be. They say it's the 2022 something or other, like the year of the city, 22 whatever. So we say in 23rd century. But I don't know how long they've been in the city, how many sort of hundreds of years, decades, what? Because everything seems to have been completely forgotten. But then you find out that they are in Washington, D.C. Or they've walked far enough. I don't think they've walked that far, but they find themselves in Washington, D.C. and they find themselves at the Lincoln Memorial. And then they see all the rest of it. How do you feel about that, this reveal of being in Washington and the monuments and stuff?
I'm fine with it. I quite like it. I think it works. I think that is some of the strongest stuff in the film, actually. Sure, I'm not sure exactly where they are. When I was a kid, I lived outside Washington. But nonetheless, I think it works visually. I think the vines on the buildings, it is very Planet of the Apes.
Yeah.
But the vines on the buildings, and you see Lincoln, and they look up, and they're like, "Oh, what's wrong with his face? Oh, that must be an old person." That's all charming.
Yeah.
I think that stuff, and then the old man who's in the U.S. Senate. It doesn't need to be the U.S. Senate. That's a little kind of hokey to me, but nonetheless, I think the old man is great. I think those conversations are great. I think actually that is everything from the escape from Box to the return to the city is probably for me the strongest portion artistically. It's just not something that anyone remembers from this movie.
No, I agree, and I agree. I really enjoyed this last part. I mean, it does hit home one thing for me, which is a completely minor point. However, it's revealed that they obviously are outside of Washington, D.C. in America. They're in Washington, D.C., America. Yet you've had two English actors as your leads. And it's at this point I'm like, oh, yes. And they haven't tried to disguise their accent in the slightest. And so it's a complete minor point. It's not even a quibble, but I was just like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if that was intentional to try and throw people off. Or was it just that Michael York and Jessica and Jenny Agutter were chosen for whatever purpose? But I agree.
Accents are, it's all a translation anyway. So I'll tell you, besides, who knows what's happened between, then and 2200. Obviously, Britain retook the United States of America.
Maybe that was the disaster. Yeah. Maybe that was the disaster that took over. Liz Truss invaded.
But also keep in mind, they don't have to be speaking English, right? So in which case, that is not necessarily their accent. It's all a translation.
Just what we are hearing. That's a good point. But I do like this this Planet of the Apes kind of reveal. And obviously the Lincoln Memorial is often used because it's a very identifiable marker. You get the needle, the memorial. And so I like all that. So I actually kind of like the fact that then it is in the Senate building. I think it feels appropriate. And that's all the stuff with Peter Ustinov is good. I mean, it's got a nice level of humor. He is he's a warming character in the center of all this, and so I like his presence. And I think he just this thing of sort of like the humor he brings to it. Sort of like there's always a crazy old man. Like he's clearly lonely and stuff. And I like the fact he keeps. Is he referencing cats when he starts?
Oh my God, I thought about that too. He references it's a jellicle cat.
Yeah.
So what's funny about this is he's referencing the T.S. Eliot stuff that Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cats was later based on. because a
Right.
Jellicle cat doesn't exist outside of T.S. Eliot's cat poetry stuff. And then that what became the source for 1981's Cats. So
Right, 'cause
yeah,
that's
it
what I
is
was
so
thinking.
weird.
Yeah, because I was thinking like I'm sure Cats didn't come out in wasn't out in '76,
Uh-huh.
but he was making these references that I was like, that sounds like the musical Cats. So okay,
Yeah.
I didn't know about the T.S. Eliot poetry, so that makes a lot more sense. But it's kind of cool. I like it. It's sort of like it's that enough of an obscure idiosyncrasy that I'm like, oh, okay, that's kind of fun. But I what I find interesting about this thing about a single individual being left, that he is sort of like, there's this thing of like, did he consider himself the last human? Because although they sort of, because, and this is what this whole sort of like the conversations they have, about him being raised by his parents, having been birthed naturally, and all these other things. However, there is still just as much of being trapped as they are. They're in that city with luxury, but he's the last person, and they say to him like, "What's beyond?" They ask him like, "What's beyond this?" And he's obviously had decades to go and explore, but like he's never left. He's been trapped in this sort of like what he knows just as much as they have. So I kind of like this fellow. While he's grown old, he's never gone off and explored. So we still don't know what's beyond Washington. Like, I'm assuming there's a similar thing, but like I kind of like that he's not just like this world knowing thing of going, well, I have traveled far and wide and I've seen this and that. Like he's just as sort of like, I don't know what's going on either, to be perfectly honest. Like he just knows his small world, and I kind of like that.
Yeah, I like it too. He talks about like knowing what his parents told him, and it's not clear at all. Has there been some sort of like atomic war? Not clear. There's no reference to radiation. They clearly don't have radiation poisoning. It's there's no indication of that.
Well, in the very first way, it just refers to a catastrophe, but it refers to
Right.
There's no it just refers to like pollution, overpopulation, and a catastrophe. So something happened, but we never been told sure if it's man-made or if it was a natural disaster. So
yeah, and it seems that the old man just kind of seems like he seems like a character from the Twilight Zone. Like
yes, 100%.
How there are so many episodes that just love being alone and people wandering through these landscapes. And one sort of silly TV show that I like is sort of like Life After People, The World Without People, and things like that envision these ruins. And it does remind me of that. And I think it's very effective in that way. It evokes that idea. And I like this idea of sort of like, it'd be so easy to say like, oh, golly gee, I remember the great catastrophe. We've all heard of that. And misremembering it in a way that, much like sort of Beyond the Planet of the Apes, does. But where it's all sort of clear, what this is all reference to. But instead, as you say, it's much more realistic. He just doesn't know.
Yeah. And I like that. And I like the fact, like you say, but he's not bothered by not knowing. And I think that's what's kind of like, he's not like, well, I don't know. And it's sort of, there'd be that, I'm sure nowadays or whatever, if for other writers, there'd be that temptation to have it as being sort of like, almost like an impediment of almost like a failure of sort of like, well, I don't know. He'd hang his head in shame. But it's like, no, but it's just sort of, well, I just live my life. I'm just sort of surviving.
Well, it seems like he's only known his two parents, right? I mean, I don't know. It does seem like if I were him, I would go exploring, but then I didn't know my two parents and nobody else in my entire life.
It does raise one question for me, and this is an odd one, but his two parents only had, all we know is that his parents had one child. Okay, and they must have known that the rest of society was gone. I don't know we don't know what they know. How oddly selfish to introduce just one individual into the world, to be like, we're going to die, and when you're done, turn the lights off. Just make sure everything's wrapped up, chairs are tucked away. I don't know. It just feels.
It though?
I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I was just because I've been reading about like hydroponics and growing stuff inside and stuff like this. And every human being, I'm vegan. Every human being, even if they're vegan, at the bare minimum requires like around 3,500 square feet to feed them for a year. So to sustain you require that much land. And that's if you don't eat any meat. I mean, you eat meat, that meat has its own land that it's got to cultivate. So, imagine every child you bring into the world, you are devoting that much space, that many reasons. You're saying, my progeny deserves that much space devoted to that. Okay.
I'm not,
So I can see look, I think we have an overpopulation problem today. So the flip side is I can see them saying like, yeah, no, you were a mistake. And we really practiced the withdrawal method a lot more carefully after you, like we did not want to bring a child into this world.
Yeah.
This is not a great world.
No, that would be a fascinating reveal in this film if he was like, oh no, I wasn't supposed to be here. Like, I'm a mistake. And that really
maybe that's why he hasn't gone exploring, right? It's like his parents are just like, look, there's die no point. With peace,
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, maybe. But they do obviously, they encourage him to come back, and obviously I'm square time, and so they bring him back to the city because they encourage him to come back because they want to show.
First, there's the fight, and he kills Francis. In the Senate chamber, and the Senate chamber. I mean, it's devastated. It's in ruins. I mean, the fight is a little overdone. But it's in ruins. I mean, and clearly some terrible disasters happened. So this is post Donald Trump being president on January 6th. So
maybe January 6th, maybe in this universe January 6th was successful, and that was the decline. I don't know, but much. They do sort of encourage. Yeah, he kills Francis, and I mean, just Francis sort of has a sort of in that moment of death has a sort of a change of heart, or at least sort of slightly. But they encourage the old man to come back, and they go back to the city. I'm not entirely sure what their plan is because they then enter through sort of like a water entry point, and he's a bit like, "Yeah, I'm not doing that."
They were like, "Yeah, this will kill you,"
you stay here.
They don't go back the way they came. Yeah, and it's.
They seem to know there's a way in, but and I want to say I don't know where this is shot, but I like that whole fountain thing. It's a very sort of interesting place. They do go back in, and they confront the people around Carousel and everything, and then, which is again, no one listens. I kind of like the fact that it's supposed, I suppose it could be done as a sort of a heroic moment of like, wait, there's another way, and I've learned this thing, and people should start listening. I like the fact that they basically stop and walk off, which is exactly how it would happen. But then Logan 5 is taken to the AI. And he's confronted, and sort of the machine's like, tell us where Sanctuary is. Where is Sanctuary? And you get a really cool like hologram effect. I like this hologram effect that he's got in these little pillars of his head rotating around, and sort of it acknowledges like it's reading his mind. There is no Sanctuary. There is nothing else. Renewal is a lie. But then the computer can't compute this. It says doesn't answer, does not program. And I kind of hate this.
Oh, it's terrible. So first of all, to save money, they shot a lot of this in the Dallas area, and I had the same reaction as you earlier. But this is in fact the Fort Worth Water Gardens, which is like a multi-acre, designed architectural park.
Oh, okay.
Around Fort Worth. So, but back to your point. Yeah, I mean, this is the does not compute, exploding robot thing. Yeah, absolutely. That's all it is.
Yeah, and I hate this when all of a sudden an AI that's been managing a city for possibly hundreds of years is stumped by this thing of Sanctuary does not exist, and it's going well, it must exist because of this thing. It's like, no, it would clearly have the logic that would say, well, I asked you to do this thing. You're telling me your experience is there is no Sanctuary. What? So what is there? Right. He tells me being frozen. Yeah, I hate this moment where it does I hate this get out of computer breaks because its logic circuits don't work. It's an awful get out. which I then feel is compounded, and I understand why they
Yes.
do this, but it's then compounded by him shooting the machine up that then seems to bring it like then the city starts to explode.
Why
And I'm
not?
like,
Well, if you kill the AI, then everything follows, right? It's like, you kill the lead zombie, they all die. Everybody knows that.
yeah, but it's like, how did this? It's
No, it's a Deus Ex Machina. It's like, look, the way you mentioned that there are parts that seem rushed, especially on the Odyssey. Nothing feels more rushed than this ending.
Than the
I
last
can't
one.
imagine
Yeah, the last
anyone
10 minutes.
satisfied by this ending.
No. Yeah, the last. It's clear they were like, we can't have a film run to over 2 hours. And you're like, okay, we're just going to stop it at this point, because it blows up. The city collapses. There's people on fire. There's all kinds of things, and then
Well, how did they get on fire?
no idea. I don't know what's going on. It's chaos. But then they all sort of turn up at this fountain, and they find the old man, and then they all seem all right with it. They're all like, oh,
Yeah.
we can grow old. And I'm
All
like,
right then.
yeah. And then you have like Jenny Agutter and Michael York hug each other, and that's the end. And I'm going like, no, sorry, you've literally just torn down.
Yes.
You are all weak, uneducated, sort of human people
Yes.
that were supported by this AI-driven society and city that has now been taken away from you. What is like? None of you know how to do farming or irrigation. None of you, you're not going to be able to build anything. What is this? How is this a victory? Like, you have just killed hundreds of thousands of people through starvation and exposure. Like, it's
and you're standing outside dressed in these minimal rags.
the moment it rains, they're all done for. Like, I don't understand. It's the
And then it's compounded by, like, the shot says the end, but then this super exposure continues as you see shots of inside the city, and you think, oh, okay, this is the city that's no more, the society that's no more. But then you realize, no, it's just a series of shots from the movie, because it ends with carousel. So, what is the point of that? No,
but the music's kind of something. That first part of the credits, it says like the end, and then the first part of the credits is a picture of the city's burning. Like, you see the city, and it's smoking, and there's like some really somber music, and I'm like, you are giving me some mixed messages right now. Like, I don't know whether I'm supposed to be sort of like, is this a catastrophe or is this a good thing? Like, I'm really confused by the ending of this film.
Well, and I think it's part and parcel to the inability of the movie to figure out what the civilization is. Is it a utopia? Is it a dystopia? It has these utopian elements, but then we're also given all of these signs that it's a dystopia. We see the sadism. We see, clearly we know how we're supposed to feel and with whom we're supposed to side. But I think this ending is, in us talking about, for example, many endings of films, but certainly in many Doctor Who episodes, where the society is left destroyed by the protagonist.
I thought the same thing. I thought exactly the same thing.
Yeah, and then that cut, end of the movie, right? All right, we defeated the fascist civilization. Tally ho, old chap, right? As people say, well, what do we eat? So interestingly, you mentioned the TV series. The TV series, which I've also never seen, but I really want to, is follows the chase of Francis chasing Jessica and Logan and their robot companion from a robot city that they find. And so it's basically like the Hulk, Right. The Westworld series was kind of like that too, oddly enough. This sort of like the Hulk chase kind of, the fugitive sort of thing. So boy, that sounds
an episodic chase film series, then basically, like The Fugitive as well, and those sorts of things.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then like with some sci-fi elements, like here's where we find the robot city. Here's where this episode we find a strange society. Yeah. Okay, but interestingly enough, they made, so this was based on a book, and there were sequels to the book. But interestingly enough, there was a Marvel comic adaptation of Logan's Run. at the time. And the first 5, it was not as successful as the later Star Wars series, which obviously changed comics. But the Logans Run series started with, I think Perez did art for it. And it was like 5-issue adaptation, just like Star Wars, 5 issues adaptation. I think Star Wars was 6, but adapting the movie. And then they continued it. It only ran for 2 additional
Because everyone
comics.
died in the next 2 issues.
Well, kind of. I mean, what's interesting is instantly what happens on like the second page of issue 6 is like the society is just revolts against Logan, and it's just like we had everything taken care of for us. What have you done?
100% what would have happened. Like it totally
absolutely. And they're just like, so instantly it's all undone. And then it's not clear whether the AI is even fully destroyed. There's some going back into the bottom of the city and being like, oh, the computers are still on down here. What's going on? And the story is never totally resolved. But I thought that was interesting because I knew you and I would both feel the same way. Like, right, you've killed all of these people. These might be the last humans left alive on this planet, you just took them out of what fed them.
Yeah, this AI, but it was literally sort of, it's bizarre. I mean, I love the fact that like even the comics, whoever was writing it was just like, no, this does not work. And they said there was a sequel. There were sequel novels. There were 2 more sequels. Novels. I've never read any of them, and in all honesty, I don't think I'll ever get around to it. But I don't know. It just feels like an interesting concept. But whenever it's this thing of these tropes, like we're always supposed to feel. We're always supposed to feel sort of like elated and it's triumphant, in these moments of sort of like they've brought down a society. But like you say, there's always these moments in we I mean, particularly we talked about this with like Strange Days. I mean, we even talked about it then. That sort of like well, how does the court case go for these things? Like, does it make any sense? And it's clear that these films don't want to answer that question. The one thing I would say about the endings, though, is obviously we talked about THX 1138 last week in the last episode. That film ends with him getting onto the surface, and you see the sun. That is the midway point of this film.
Yes, literally, there's the same shot.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought that they come out and they're like, and Michael York's like, they're like, what is that? And he's like, but it's warm. And I kind of, again, I'm like, I get that they wouldn't know maybe what the sun is, but it's like that. What lack of knowledge do they not have? I suppose it depends on what you're taught and not taught. But yeah, I kind of like the idea that okay, because then it made me think again about THX. So I'm like, cool. Did he find, that he was in Washington DC and find an old man and like I don't know, like and that's why it makes me even more sort of dissatisfied with the last film where I'm like, well, at least this made an attempt at something beyond that. But
I did find myself thinking, especially about the sexual utopia of this film. I mean, obviously, food is higher on the hierarchy of needs, but the sort of sexual utopia, I imagine instantly what happens after this ends is, first of all, how does this apply to renewal? How will we be renewed now without the AI, the city? And secondly, we have to fight for survival. Well, this woman's my property,
Oh yeah,
that's the next line. It's like, you're mine now, and and you're mine, and you're mine. Wait, what are you saying?
This descends into violence very quickly.
Yeah, I agree completely. This is just brutal. The next 5 minutes.
Yeah. Then the next film is sort of like Logan's battle or Logan's sort of like fight, because this just descends into chaos. If anything, I think that what you find is the Sandmen, who are the only ones that are armed, become a ruling military elite.
Yes. Yeah, it's going to be like Walking Dead, sort of like I'm the totalitarian governor instantly.
Yeah, And
Yeah, well,
so-
we're the ones who know how to keep order, damn it. You know, and if you don't
Yes.
like it, you can shut the hell up.
Yes, and I think that's exactly the same. Choice to have a happy ending, but there's no happy ending here, and I think that's what's interesting about these films is when you sort of go, like you say, what happens next? Like, how do they survive? Because I almost in the 50s, I'm pretty sure when we did the 50s block, there was it when the when worlds collide, and they had something similar where they land on. How will we survive? And you go, we'll find a way, and it's sort of like they left at that, and you're like, all right. At least they sort of like that was a little bit like that was a point of that, but
yeah, they knew that was at least acknowledge like we don't have an answer for you, but humanity will survive.
Yeah,
it probably will be rough. There will be unjust death, but we'll get there eventually as a people. This is just like, oh, good, we overthrew that totalitarian AI.
Yeah,
I mean, I just think like, do they know? They don't know where babies normally come from.
Nope.
It's like there's a comedic Mel Brooks sequel to this, which is just like, oh, wait a minute, your womb produces the babies, right? Oh, well, that's my baby, and you're mine now, and you're not having sex with any of these other guys now. I mean, you could watch that discovery from, theoretical discovery from our ancient history, which has been linked to the rise of patriarchy and all of this, and watch that happen in real time.
Yeah, this leads into some sort of like medieval fascist society that sort of like they return to in like 100. Any film.
This is the real prequel to Game of Thrones,
Yes. Yeah. Well, there are films like, there are even books. There's all these books about the fall, aren't there? Where they have like the fall of the world, and it either becomes a dystopia, a utopia, or it becomes like a wasteland. And I think that's where I sort of like you see some of these things, and I think that's what this is. This is the start of like some feudal society now, where they're all going to start having to fight over what they know. I don't know. Anyway, we have reached the end of Logan's Run, and as we can see, even though it was a nice long run, I don't think there were any winners. So, any final thoughts on Logan's Run?
No, I this was a fascinating discussion, and I learned a lot. I had to rethink a lot. I think we saw it very similarly. If I have one final thought, it's why do the guns not work? It seems as if the guns like shoot out sticks of dynamite that just then explode across surfaces. It's like the most poorly. I want like a Star Trek phaser or something. Clearly, it's not intended, but you see these sparklers on the floor, going off, and they're the worst shots ever. I mean, they make stormtroopers look great.
They do, they do. I like the flared effect though, as it comes out of the nozzle, the muzzle of the gun. That looks kind of cool. But you're right, they aren't very effective. They're really quite incompetent. But yeah. But overall, is this a film you would return to, or is this sort of like you're like, oh, I've seen it and I'm good for now?
Yeah, I don't know when I ever have to see this again. I mean, I'm not opposed to. I'm actually more interested in seeing the TV series, and checking out an episode and seeing if, it's worth checking out a second one. What's interesting is this is such a staple of the 1970s sci-fi that there's been talk about a remake for like 20 years now.
For years. Yeah.
And I mean, it could be good, right? But I mean, it's not as if this is such an amazing movie, despite being well known. So that seems odd to me. And there hasn't been ancillary media, that has really continued, except for like an ebook. Would you watch this again?
I don't know. It's one of those. I think in a couple of years, many years, like it's not one I've gone to. I think it's probably been like 10 years since I saw it last. So it might be one if it was on, if I came across it or something, like, oh, I might watch that again, or for whatever purpose. But it's not one I'm gonna jump back into. Does it need a remake? I think now would be a cool time to do the remake. I think this idea of sort of like youth culture and the idea of sort of like leisure and reliance on technology. I think there's a lot there to explore, and it could be used to sort of, to address those issues. You just need to change the ending. You need to address that ending and how that comes about. Otherwise, it'll fall flat on the same thing again. But I do think there's some more. This could be a very useful story, or a very good story to sort of look at, especially that generational divide that we have at the moment. Of the old versus the new sort of thing. So I think there's room for a good story there.
Well, one interesting thing that apparently is true of that TV series is that behind the AI, the real cabal behind the city were old men and old people, which is not a terrible idea.
No.
So I mean, the one thing I insist on is the remake is just close-ups of gyrating young bodies, really pump up the utopian sexual space. And, Timothée Chalamet is Logan's Run.
Yeah. So you want HBO to make it, basically. I think that's what it'll do it.
Pretty much.
No, I do think it'd be good. I mean, I kind of enjoy this film. I think it's sort of watching it as a child. It's sort of Jenny Agutter was a sexual awakening for me. But the film's got some really good moments. I think it's kind of light on some of its philosophy and stuff. But I think some of the chasing's good. I think some of the it's shot well. I think there's some nice reveals in it. It's just the ending that really sort of lets it down a little bit. But no, it's not something I'm going to race back to. But I think there's enough there that it could be a good story.
Did you get Farrah Fawcett?
Yes, as Mary.
Another fantasy.
Yeah. Yes. Going through all this. Obviously, we've now done Barbarella as well. So sort of, I'm just stacking up these sort of like these 60s and 70s sort of sex kitten kind of icons. But we're going back, talking of 70s, and we're going to be sort of jumping into the next decade with the next film. We're leaving the 70s and we're going into the 80s. And what better way to enter the 80s than with a sci-fi staple? We absolutely tore the first film of this franchise apart in I think in season 1, but now we're returning for what is considered by many to be the highlight. We're going to be doing Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back. So we are returning for the second in the original trilogy. And what do we think? How is that going to come across? We shall find out next episode.
And that's fascinating because obviously Star Wars changed sci-fi movie history. I mean, it really, everything is pre and post Star Wars. So, it'll be great to go back to The Empire Strikes Back. And, it's great to be doing season 4 and we're on the 9th episode and heading toward that mid-season, marker there. In the really amazing chronological list of 24 films. So thank you to everyone who's going along on this journey.
Yeah, because we've done some crackers, and we started in the 30s, and we're now getting into the 80s. We've already done 50 years, or we're getting into sort of like, the end of 70s, sort of almost 50 years worth of cinema that we're covering off, and the difference already has been fascinating. So
if they lived in Logan's Run, they'd be dead already.
That's
50
true.
years.
Yeah, wouldn't even get to watch that many films. But Liz, yes, we're right. I hope you're enjoying it. It's been a fascinating run. But if you will like what we're doing and you're enjoying this, please let us know. Leave a review on any podcast catcher. It helps us get up in the rankings. We appreciate it. 5 stars, 4 stars, all good. We really appreciate it. And more importantly, if you do really like what we're doing, go check out our Patreon, www.patreon.com/20cgmedia. That's 20cg media. There'll be a link down below, as always. So go check that out. But yeah, we really appreciate everyone that supports and listens. And we've got way more films to go. We've got some crackers coming up. But Star Wars is coming next. So let's see. Are we a part of the Jedi, or as I'm more suspecting, are we part of the dark side? We shall find out. But Julian, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's a good discussion on Logan's Run.
Thank you. This is a joy. And, I learn something every time I get to chat with you. And I hope that our listeners feel likewise.
Yes, I hope, and let us know if you do. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And we shall see you again soon.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.